Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Lugos Journey podcast. Today, I have Farris Fakhoury, who is a physical therapist at the Kessler Institute, and he deals with paraplegics who are, what we would describe as physically suffering. Paraplegics, people who've gone through seizures, neurochemical problems, but at the same time, they have been able to overcome all of these problems and still thrive mentally. So he has just written a book that's coming out in 2 weeks called The Happiness Perspective. And I want to dig in deeper to Farris Fakhoury to figure out what is the difference between the people who thrive mentally and the people who don't, who really suffer, right? Even though they're suffering the most physical ailments. So Farris Fakhoury, it's great having you on.
Thank you so much for having me, Nick. I appreciate it. Yeah, I'm excited to chat a little bit about this and sort of, I would love to at least give you a little bit of a backdrop of sort of why I decided to write this book quickly.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
like you mentioned, I'm a physical therapist. I was involved with sports my whole life, played soccer my whole life. And then once I graduated, I went to Villanova University for my undergrad work. I was a psychology major. And then probably my sophomore year of college, I figured out I wanted to do physical therapy, just having been injured and having gone to physical therapy myself. And once I figured out I wanted to do physical therapy, I just took all the prerequisites to then apply to physical therapy school. I ended up going to PT school, physical therapy school at Rutgers University. And it's a 3-year program. I graduated in 2012 with my doctorate in physical therapy. And I've been working at Kessler Institute since. And I really got into the profession thinking I wanted to work with athletes, being involved with sports my whole life. Throughout your 3 years of PT school, you do rotations in different settings. And I did one at the current hospital I'm at now. And I worked with all individuals who have had neurological injuries, which you alluded to a little bit. So I treat individuals who have had some pretty life-changing injuries like stroke, brain injury, spinal cord injury, multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's. So anything affecting the brain and spinal cord. And I've been there ever since. And
Interesting.
yeah, so it's been a fun journey so far. And I started the journey of writing my book about a year ago. So I'm almost there. Finish line is right there.
So tell me, what inspired you? Most people are doctors, people who work for all these patients, what inspired you, especially, maybe it's because you have a psychology background, maybe because it just, you notice the people around you. What inspired you to actually write The Happiness Perspective?
Yeah, I mean, just dealing and treating these individuals, this patient population was a lot for me emotionally and mentally, especially the patients who were more closer to my age. These young individuals who were having strokes and brain injuries, and it was just a lot for me to handle, honestly. And, I got into the profession thinking I would be able to, leave work, not think about my patients, but I just found myself thinking about them all the time. So about 3 or 4 years into my career, I started journaling and writing things down just to get things out of my head, which was very cathartic for me. And then fast forward 8 years, I ended up meeting one of my patients. She graduated from Georgetown University. And then a couple months after she graduated, she ended up having a stroke herself. And she sort of chronicled her journey and her recovery in writing a book. And with a lot of my patients, I develop relationships with them. I communicate with them pretty frequently while we're in therapy, going through their rehab. And she sort of was a catalyst for me wanting to write my book. She said, "Why don't you write a book?" I was like, "I can't write a book. What are you talking about?" So she's the one that said, "I think you should really do it. You have a lot of, powerful messages that a lot of people would love to hear." So she was the reason why I started this journey. And, I do owe it all to her. I enjoy writing, but I never in a million years thought I would be able to write a book.
The reason I love your book, and the reason why I love, especially this topic in general, is because, we could take a look at these people who are suffering from neurochemical problems and, all these major ailments. But at the same time, we could take their lessons and apply it to all aspects of our life. Like, this is not some chronicle of people who are struggling outside of our world. It's like, no, they have the same human psychology. They might be suffering from, I think we all hear stories of, heroes who are, suffering from paraplegic ailments, who have amputees, but still are so mentally sharp and are mentally thriving. So I definitely did want to dive right into it. What is the difference, especially for everybody, not only for the paraplegics, that is the difference between those who thrive mentally and those who just physically suffer and cannot handle the suffering of reality?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to mention that the things I talk about and the lessons I talk about really transcend physical rehab and are applicable to our daily mindsets, the daily struggles that we all go through. We all have them. They're all there. They're all real. So I've noticed 4 things specifically that have helped my patients in their recovery unlock their happiness. The first one is turning their apathy into altruism. The second is having moments of weakness, but not letting it turn into a mindset of weakness. The third thing is turning their grief into gratitude. And then the last thing, the fourth thing is this concept of the process versus the final product. And I talk a lot about each one of those. I unpack those a lot in each chapter, but apathy into altruism really quickly. People, when they first have people, when they first have their injuries, they're very apathetic. They lose interest in life. They don't feel like they have a purpose. They're a burden to their loved ones. The moment they're able to turn that apathy into altruism, getting involved with support groups, talking to other people, building connections with people, other people, I've noticed my patients that has helped them tremendously in unlocking their happiness. And then the second thing I mentioned is having those moments of weakness. We all have them. You can't be perfect every single day. It's a process. It's a journey. And having those moments of weakness is okay as long as we don't let it spiral and snowball into a mindset where you're stuck in that negative state. So that's the second thing. And then process versus product, focusing on the process versus the final product of things. Specifically, obviously the framework is physical rehab medicine that I talk about. My patients, the first thing they ask me is, when will I be able to do things like I used to do? And I feel like once they turn their attention to the past or too far to the future, that sort of elicits some sort of stress response, anxiety response, where they lose sight of the process and the small gains that they are able to make on a day-to-day basis. And then the last thing I mentioned is grief into gratitude. My patients, when they come to therapy, it's a pretty busy gym where I work. So as soon as they see other people going through something much worse than they're going through, for example, like a stroke, sometimes a stroke is not a stroke and is not a stroke. Every stroke is different. It all depends on what part of the brain was affected. So sometimes individuals will have problems with, just moving their arm. Their arm is just paralyzed. Then they come into the gym, they see people who've had strokes where their arm and their leg is paralyzed and the patient can barely even stand up or sit up. So once they sort of can turn their grief into gratitude and sort of have those opportunities to be grateful, those are the 4 things that I highlight in my book and I've noticed help my patients unlock their happiness and recovery.
It's funny because like all everything that you're talking about, so turning apathy into altruism, grief into gratitude, focusing on the process versus the product, and also accepting those moments of weakness but not turning it into a mindset. Those 4 things I have noticed along my journey too, and it's absolutely incredible. I think one of the biggest struggles for people, most of my listeners are people who are young and pursuing a goal, right? They're pursuing some valuable goal. People in college, people who are 20 years old, 30 years old, and they have something to pursue that is meaningful, whether it be a career, whether it be a family, whether it be, anything of that sort. And it's funny because I find that the thing that really pushes people to fail is focusing on the process versus the product, on the product versus the process.
Right.
I actually, it was funny. I started doing a morning workout, for example, right? And I think, people don't work out because they start working out and then it gets boring a little bit and then you don't see as much results right away. And I'm sure it's the same thing with paraplegics. They don't see the results right away, and what I started to do, and I find this to be incredibly beneficial. Like I've been working out in the morning now for 100+ days, straight.
Nice.
And that's the thing. I was never able to do that. But what changed was I actually worked out. I did a 5-minute workout. It's nothing crazy, right? I'm not looking for gains. And I made sure not to work out my abs or my biceps. I made
Nice.
I made it purposefully, because I wanted to focus on the process. I didn't want to focus on making my biceps big or
Right,
looking
right.
good.
What we all, yeah.
Right. And I think that's a valuable lesson, to really focus on the process versus the
Yeah,
end.
and it's not about recovery in the sense where people are getting back to 100%, because the reality of the environment I'm in and the patients I treat, you look at someone who I interviewed, and I think I know you had the opportunity to chat with too, someone like Eric Legrand. He had a spinal cord injury, and depending on the level of the spine that's impacted dictates the extent of the paralysis. So his was pretty high up. He had a C3, C4, and that just means like very high up in the neck. So, and it was a complete spinal cord injury, meaning his whole spinal cord was severed. So he's paralyzed from his neck down, but he rolls into the gym and he's honestly the happiest person I've probably ever met. And, a lot of my patients are like that. A lot of my patients exhibit that happiness. So it's not the individuals who make the best recovery physically. It's more about the mindset during their recovery that has helped them unlock their happiness. That's
And
something I wanted to tackle a little bit and
yeah.
talk about in my book. So,
Yeah, I mean, doesn't that make us all feel like crap, right?
right.
Right? Like there is some, like we have all these things to complain about in our lives. Like
Yep.
especially now, it's 2020, we've reached the end, politics, we could always talk about politics. We could always talk about coronavirus. There are all these things that we could really complain about. But at the same time, it's like people have cut off, Eric Legrand has no access to anything below his shoulders. But
Yep.
at the same time, he is as happy as a bean. And it's like, why do we, focus on the little sufferings of the day? Why do we really, why do we choose, why do we not choose gratitude? And why do we choose grief?
Mm,
That's your rule too. It's like,
yeah.
why do we not focus on the most important things?
And I think it's how we frame things. And it's important to recognize that those small day-to-day challenges that we all go through, not to downplay them because they're real. They produce anxiety,
Yeah.
stress. But is it really that bad? A. And B, I think the way we look at things and the way we frame things can help set us up to not overcome, but deal with those day-to-day struggles. And one of the things I talk about, one of the chapters is happiness, of course. That's the framework that I talk about. And happiness as being, the way I like to think of it is as a muscle. We have over 600 muscles in our body. Going through my PT work, I learned the ins and outs of all the muscles in our body. And I argue in my book that my PT program failed to teach me about the most important muscle, which is our happiness muscle. And
I love that.
like all other muscles in our body, they like to sort of grow, stretch. They need good hydration. And the more we're able to feed our happiness muscle with different things, I think it helps us flex our happiness muscle a little bit more. And just like regular muscles, you want to get stronger with your biceps, for example, which is probably the number one thing most of us will target, and our abs, like you mentioned. To get them stronger, you obviously have to do some strength training. But if you don't, then they atrophy, they get weaker, and you don't have that muscle tone that you're looking for. So if we don't work our happiness muscle, I think it gets weaker. And I don't think happiness is a final destination. I think it's a journey. And the more we're able to feed our happiness muscle, the more conditioned it will be, and we can be happier and sustain that happiness at higher levels for a little bit longer.
Yeah, there was I mean, I think what you're really talking about is, there are so many ways that you could look at this, but from a neurobiology perspective or from a psychology perspective, that holds true.
Mm,
It's like our habits, right? If you have a habit of being negative, if then your brain is wiring itself to always looking at the negatives. Always. It's always
yep.
looking at the negatives. You're always trying to look for things to complain about, things to struggle with, and then you become a negative person. And I think we've all dealt with those people who always see life with the glass half empty. But at the same time, the happiness muscle could be trained. I guess, yeah, this habit can be trained to really look at life in a positive way, to really view the world from a glass half full, to really see it as a better place than the pessimist would look at it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things I talk about in my book is I really tapped into the psychology and leverage my psychology education. It's crazy how like it took me a couple of years to really want to do that.
Hmm.
But I think it's so paramount in like treating the patients I treat. Oftentimes, just being an ear to my patients to talk to and listen to. I see my patients 2, 3, 4 times a week at an hour at a time, so they're confiding in me a lot. I develop relationships with them, and just the power of the mind is really, really important, and how it impacts our bodies, our mindset, how it impacts our bodies physically. And there's studies to suggest that the whole mind body paradigm and what we think and how we think really impacts our body physically. And I think the more we're able to control our minds, which is not easy, it's something that takes time, practice, and intention to be able to do that. But the more we're able to do that, I think it helps set us up nicely for feeding our happiness muscle and really focusing on the important things in life. And it's not easy at all, but it's something that's possible.
Yeah. Well, so actually you have I think you brought up an interesting point where, you have your boots on the ground. You are literally dealing with these people all the time. You are dealing with patients coming in and out, and you see them go through their own journey, like,
Hmm.
first of all, I have two questions. So
Yeah.
first, do you watch them like once they start going into rehab? Are you the guy that they see first, or are you the institute that they see first? And then also give me a great story, or give me a great way of understanding
Yes.
what the journey looks like and what the psychology of the people actually is.
Yeah, yeah. So I think it's important, and one of my goals of the book is to educate people on healthcare, the healthcare system a little bit, and like the progression of what happens when someone has a stroke. I think empowering my patients is something I really take pride in, and giving them the information. So I mentioned earlier that I'm in the outpatient setting. So if you think about someone, I'll give you an example. Someone who, say, loses a leg, whether it's because of an accident or diabetes or vascular disease, those are the top 3 reasons why someone will lose a leg. So if someone loses a leg, they go to the hospital, they lose their leg. They're typically in the hospital for 3 or 4 days, and they need to get medically stable, make sure there's no major infection, make sure the surgery went well, um, their blood work is good, all that stuff. Once that happens, they are then transferred to most likely an acute rehab hospital. So that means that a patient will go to acute rehab hospital. They're pretty medically stable, but they need to learn how to now transfer, meaning going from their bed to their wheelchair, because now they don't have a leg. So they have to learn how to move around and get functionally independent to be able to do things by themselves. Their whole life has turned upside down, it's changed. So they have to learn how to do these things. So typically they will go to the acute rehab hospital. They're still staying in the hospital, but they're getting pretty intense therapy while they're in the hospital. After that, the patient will then either go home or go to a subacute facility where a subacute facility is just not as intense therapy. And I highlight all this in my books. I think it's important for people to know this who are going through this. If
Yeah.
they go home, then now they're in their wheelchair, most likely, if you lost a leg, because their leg has to heal until they get their prosthesis, their fake leg, to learn how to use it. Once it
Okay.
heals, usually it's like 2 or 3 months after surgery. So by the time I see them an outpatient, they're pretty far along in their journey of recovery. They're probably 2, 3, 4 months in. So I'm not the first line of defense in terms of their rehab. They typically will see me months later, probably 2 or 3 months after their initial injury. And the same is true for a stroke or brain injury. Oftentimes, hospital, a subacute rehab facility, and then outpatient. So I
Okay.
see them a little further along, and I'm usually the last stop in their recovery. So by this time, reality is sort of setting in for them. They're home. They sort of know that after outpatient therapy, there's not really much else after. So that's why I really take pride in empowering my patients, trying to get them to buy into living a little bit of a healthier lifestyle, doing exercise on their own, because therapy is not forever. And that's the hardest conversation I have with my patients, is like, that discharge discussion. Okay, we've sort of reached our goals. We have to stop therapy. You have to go out into the real world and you're on your own now. So they're trying to figure out their new normal. And I think psychologically that's pretty tough to do. And that's why I think for me as a physical therapist, it's part of what I have to do is tapping into the psychological piece. So that's a quick overview. An example of someone going through like the 4 stages I talked about. There was an individual who lost his leg, one of my patients. And when I run the amputee support group at the hospital I work at. So it's just a support group where individuals who have lost their legs can sort of meet, talk to each other, learn from each other. So I met him at one of our support groups, and he had just lost his leg probably 10 days prior to me meeting him. He was with his wife, who was very supportive, and he was just so reserved, so down. His body posture was, he was in his wheelchair and just looking down, not interested at all about what was going on in the meeting. And he was completely apathetic. So he had no interest in recovery and getting better and talking to anybody. A couple of months later, I got the opportunity to work with him in outpatient. He had just got his prosthesis, his fake leg, started learning how to use it, getting up and moving, getting out of his wheelchair, walking with the walker, then the cane. His whole demeanor was changing. He was getting more happy, essentially, and he was able to walk in and out of therapy with a cane. Then 2 or 3 months later, he came back to the support group, and he was talking to everybody. He was helping others who have, who were just starting the process of going through and learning what life was like without their legs. And I couldn't get him to shut up during the meeting. So he was just completely different person, just 2, 3, 4 months later. And it was just really cool to see. And he's the first person, and I talk about him in my book, that comes to mind, just going through the 4 steps.
So it's super interesting, so you are working with paraplegics and people who are suffering from, these neurological damages. And, you outline really the 4 things in your book, right? You outline the 4 things that people should have, or I guess the 4 things that people, the mindset that people should have as they're going through this journey and as they're, really trying to recover, mentally, right?
Yes.
The question is, what is the thing, that really changed this man and that really changed most people, right? To shift their mindset from the, apathy to really, changing their lives and, really trying to live a great life.
Yeah. And I firmly believe, it might sound a little crazy, that you can't motivate someone. I think we all have it in us. So my job as a physical therapist and the psychological piece is like just trying to get people to see it. I think I maybe will give them the tools to see that they're able and they're possible to achieve some of the goals they want to achieve. I don't think I can really motivate someone. I'm there just to sort of be what they want me to be. And it's something that I've grown into and lean into a lot. Because when I first started my career, I was so caught up on going through my evaluation with my patients, making sure I was doing my testing and making sure I was giving them the proper exercises. I was very linear in my thought process when I first started my career. And it's taken me a couple of years. And I think the power of listening to people, the power of human connection. So I talk about 3 things also in part 3 of my book, about 3 lessons specifically that my patients have taught me, and that I, carry with me in my daily mindset. But the power of human connection and just listening to people, and I feel like it's a lost art, and being able to connect with people is so powerful. And I think when I'm able to do that, patients trust me more. I'm able to build a better rapport. But to answer your question, I think we all have it in us. We just need the right tools, if you think of like plants, the right watering to get it to grow. So I think part of my job is just to get people to buy into and see that they're able to, overcome obstacles and figure out their lives after such a traumatic event.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
It's so funny because you are a physical therapist, you work on the body, but it seems like a lot of your job, and I think maybe you could disagree, but maybe the most important aspect of your job is working on the mind.
100%. And that's why it was so, 2 or 3 years into my career, I was feeling like burned out. I was so emotionally exhausted. Um, there's this term, compassion fatigue, that really hit me. And it was very exhausting. So like just writing things down psychologically helped me drastically, get things out of my head. And yeah, I see 2 patients an hour, and, people are unloading on me. They're telling me
Yeah.
their struggles with their family members. I feel so bad. People will cry in their sessions with me. And guess what? Once I'm done with those 2 patients, the very next hour, I have 2 patients coming right in, right behind them.
Yeah.
So I never had a chance to really process things. So yeah, it's emotionally exhausting, but I think going back to my point is sometimes I just listen to my patients. And my first visit with my patients is an evaluation. I used to think I needed to get through my testing, see what they can do, what they can't do. There are times now when I just talk to my patients and I don't get to any of the objective testing, because I really do believe building a connection with them is more important and helps in the long run in terms of their recovery and, them trusting me more. So sometimes I'll talk to them for 45 minutes, an hour, just about what they're going through. And that has been really, really powerful in their recovery process as well. They're more engaged. They want to come to therapy. They don't cancel as much. They're more, you know, prone to stick to their home exercise program. So those little things are I think speak volumes to how my patients value those things. But yeah, the emotional and psychological piece is paramount in their physical recovery as well.
So that's a great question. So, you are developing, this is like, there's a great idea that people always develop good relationships with their barber. Like when people talk to their
Yeah.
barber, it's 30 minutes of just being sitting there and there's nothing to do, nothing to talk about. So you just start talking to your barber, and it's the same thing with physical therapy and the fact that you're going to be there for 45 minutes. You might as well just talk to the physical therapist because there's nothing else to do, right? And
Yeah.
you're an interesting guy, so hopefully hopefully they like you a little bit more. So I think that's a good question. So you have developed a relationship with these patients, and really, how have you helped them, and also how have they helped you?
Mm. So yeah, I mean, I got into this profession wanting to help other people, right? But never in a million years would I think my patients would be helping me so much more than I would be helping them. They have helped me shift my perspective on, you know, trying to appreciate the small things, appreciate the small victories in our day-to-day struggles. Be grateful for all the things that I do have. One of the ways I feed my happiness muscle is in my apartment here. When I leave every single morning, I have it's like a chalkboard where my keys go. It's like a key holder.
Mhm.
Every single morning, it's just a saying on there, I am grateful for. And every single morning, I just write one thing down. So it sort of sets the tone for me for the day to shift my mindset into being grateful for all the small victories. I know how quickly in an instant life can change, and it can happen to anybody. We can wake up, we can have a stroke, we can wake up, we can get in a car accident. I see it day in and day out. So just being appreciative of all the little things. My patients have really helped me with that. And then just not taking anything for granted, doing things that I want to do now in the moment versus waiting. One of the books that I sort of mentioned in my book is The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying. It was written by Bronnie Ware. And oftentimes we think things that make us happy, the pursuit of material things, the promotion at work, are not the things that really make us happy. Oftentimes the things that make us happy are the things we sacrifice: talking to other people, connecting with others, traveling. Those are the things that really make us truly happy. And those are the things I focus my energies on. So yes, I help my patients with their physical recovery and them talking to me and unloading and being able to get things out of their head. But my patients have helped me so much more that I truly believe, and I feel like I'm helping them.
That's so interesting. So why do you think that
Yeah.
is? Why do you think, and this gets back to the fact that you're dealing with people with extreme physical ailments, why do you
Uh-huh.
think it is that, especially when we're talking about the top 5 regrets of the dying, it's like, why do we separate so far from the person that we're meant to be? Like, why do we get so clouded in our vision that we could only realize it by the time that we're dying? Why can't, like, throughout our life we actually become, grateful and embrace the right mindset and, really focus on the things that make us happy?
Yeah, and the psychological piece is something that I really researched a lot, and one of the I talk about the framework of happiness a lot in the book, in the beginning of the book, and there's work by a psychologist from Yale University. Her name is Dr. Laurie Santos,
I
and
took her course. Yep.
so good. And
Yeah.
the framework that she highlights about happiness is that we just are our minds, our brains are so wired to put our energies into the wrong things, and it's things that we don't even notice, but it's the fact that we just are naturally day in and day out are putting our efforts, our minds, the pursuit of things that we think will make us happy into those wrong things. And that's why it sets us up for failure. We're constantly left with this feeling of, not being satisfied. And I'm guilty of it. Like, I've always been driven by the final product. I always thought, like, soccer wise, just looking back, having, good grades soccer wise, making the varsity team, graduating from high school, going to a good school, college, getting my degree, playing soccer in college. I was fortunate enough to do that. And then after Villanova, I went to PT school. I'm like, all right, I'm going to study really hard, get really good grades, get a great job. I'm like, all right, this is it. I'm going to be super happy when I graduate. And I got my job, and it just never stopped. Even in my job, I was so driven by the final product and the results of moving up the clinical ladder, getting my promotions, and then being the manager. And then I just constantly was chasing this thing that I feel like I never was able to get a hold of. And I was like, what is going on? So I think it sort of speaks to focusing on the present moment. I feel like we lose sight of that. We're constantly looking too far ahead or looking in the past on, like, regrets or mistakes that we made. So trying to live more in the moment, I think, is a big thing too.
Interesting.
And I'm learning and appreciating that more as I get older.
Yeah, there's actually, so you want to hear a great quote? This quote almost inspires everything that I do, and it's by Tony
Yeah.
Robbins. He says, "Success without fulfillment is the ultimate failure."
It's beautiful.
Powerful. It's beautiful.
Right?
And I think it really speaks to, the fact that we live most of our lives unconscious. We live most of our lives being influenced by the external environment. School pushes you to go a certain way. Your job pushes you to go a certain way. And you never really sit back and ask yourself, these are all the things that people want from me. What do I want? Right? Like, what really is going to make me happy? And I think the fact that we live our lives really unaware of this, the fact that we live our lives just so focused on, like you said, goals, right? Like these goals of, did you know that 47% of PhD students feel depression after they graduate?
It's nuts. And just a prime example of, like, the final, when you reach your goal, it's okay to have them. I think it's important that you have to have goals.
Agreed.
But I think it's also important to appreciate the little victories along the way, because if you don't, nothing we ever accomplish will ever be enough. So you have to really appreciate and acknowledge the little victories, because that's what life's all about. It's all about the journey. And one of the things, I love traveling. And I think when you experience different cultures and different places, I think it makes you live in the moment a lot more, because there's so many, you just don't know what's going to happen. So it's making you focus on the present moment, appreciate all the new things you're seeing. And what's also nice about the fact that one of the things I love about traveling is, like, you can't compare. I feel like we compare ourselves a lot to other people. If I go visit Italy or something, I can't compare my experience with someone else's. Like, it's only my experience, and it's something that I love to do. And traveling is really something that I really need to do, because it really helps me recharge my batteries, but it just helps me with my happiness. It's something that really helps me live in the moment and appreciate what's going on in that moment. So
well,
it's
actually,
hard. It's hard,
yeah,
but it's something that we all can work on and get better with.
Well, that's the thing. So Aristotle, he believed that humans, should have a goal that they will never be able to pursue. They should live their lives pursuing something that they will never achieve. And that's the thing that's going to keep them engaged their entire lives, because once they achieve it, then you experience these bouts of depression, and you're like, what do I do now? And you're stuck with that sort of syndrome. So I do agree with you on the fact that traveling, or more generally focusing on the present moment, like really
Yep.
enjoying the fact that you are in the journey. The journey is what matters, because once you reach the destination, it's not going to make you happy anyways.
Agreed. Agreed. And
it,
going to Aristotle and the whole concept of stoicism and all
yeah.
that, like, I love that stuff. I think we've lost sight of that over the past, obviously, couple decades. And I feel like we're sort of in a little renaissance, a stoic renaissance now, and like trying to find meaning in life, and looking at those philosophies of like love and relationships and meaning. I feel like we lost sight of that, but in the midst of the pandemic, I feel like a lot of people are questioning that. And I think this is really a perfect time to be launching this book about happiness.
Yeah.
Um, Oddly enough. So I feel like we've definitely lost sight of that. And I'm a big fan of Stoicism, and I do a lot of reading on them. And I think the messages of Aristotle and Plato and all those Stoics are just really powerful. And I think we are in the midst of trying to figure out a lot of the concepts that they discuss and the things that they stand for. So,
Well, let me ask you a question. So, do you
yeah.
think, I truly believe that this pandemic, and maybe this might be, I guess I won't call it a privilege, because I've definitely worked at it, but I've had the luck of being able to embrace this mindset, this being exposed to the people who will help me with this mindset, the mindset of the happiness perspective, and to be able to look at it from a positive point of view, to look at
Mm,
life from a positive point of view. And I could happily say that coronavirus was a good thing. Like, obviously people were suffering physical ailments, people died, but at the same time, for all the people who, had to be shut down, for all the people who had to really, change their lives and really had to reorient everything, they experienced a psychological awakening, right?
mm,
They were left with a complete, almost nothing, right? You're left with zero. You have, your work is going to be completely boring, and you're not going to spend time on that. Your school, same thing. There's going to be very little. You're going to have a lot of downtime, a lot of time for yourself, and that's the time where, and this is my belief on it, coronavirus, the lockdowns, all these things, they helped so many people, because they awoke them, they woke them
mm.
up, and they really allowed for them to really think about their lives in this downtime, in this reorganizing, and be like, wait a second, I have not been living my life to the highest potential that I possibly could, and screw it, I'm going to do it. But then at the same time, I believe that a majority of the people, because that's always how it is, a majority of the people, so there's two perspectives, there's that perspective, and a majority of the people are just going to sit there, and they're going to be like, 2020 was bad, this was just a waste of a year, and all those things. So I do believe that coronavirus was good for a lot of people, but at the same time, it also caused a lot of suffering.
Absolutely. And I think, like you said, there's going to be those people who look at this like, what a waste of a year. And, I can't believe this happened to me. And,
Yeah.
people are getting, whether it's health wise, they're getting really impacted by this. Obviously people are losing loved ones. And I mean, I see it every single day. I'm treating these patients as well who are coming off these ventilators, and all the sequelae and impairments that these patients are dealing
Yeah.
with after. So it's real, it's out there. I know, not to get political or anything, but it's something that I see every single day. And I've had to pivot in terms of how I treat my patients too. Like, we've done a lot of telehealth. Initially, when this all first happened, we're not allowing individuals to come into their caregivers and loved ones to come into therapy anymore. And psychologically, that has affected my patients. I've had to walk my patients out to the parking lot a lot of the times now, because, and just to give my patients' family members an overview of how therapy went. So I've had to pivot a lot, and the profession of PT in general, a lot of my colleagues have had to pivot a lot. But yes, it's been a challenge for everyone. But at the same time, I think how we frame what we're going through will dictate what we see and the lens at which we see. And I like to think of it of, I'm an iPhone guy. I have an iPhone. So like portrait mode on a camera, you go to take a portrait mode picture, you bring into focus what you want to focus on. Everything else in the background gets blurry. So your image is really crystal clear in the portrait mode of what you're looking at. And I think that analogy is good to look at when we're looking at how we look at our daily obstacles, daily challenges that we all face. People are complaining that they didn't have enough time to spend with their children because they're constantly working. Now they're home all the time. They're sick of being home with their kids. That's just an example, that I think of. This is a good opportunity to spend time with family, to rebuild our connections with other people. So it's not easy by any means. I know it's been a huge pivot and shift that a lot of people have had to deal with. So it's been a struggle, but I think how we look at things and how we frame things will really dictate how we see the world around us.
So what you're really talking about, and I just want to, that was beautiful, and I think what you're really talking about is finding meaning in suffering, and both of us, really love this book. This book is actually my favorite book of all time. It's called Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. And what he talks about is he was unfortunate enough to be a Polish Jew in the 1940s. Like how awful is it to exist in that time, and suffered in Auschwitz, went to 3 different concentration camps, and just suffered all the physical ailments you could possibly go through, went through the worst of it all. And 1 out of 28 people did not make it out of there, or 1 out of 28 people did make it out of there. But he was able to not only have the mindset to be able to make it out, to be able to overcome the physical suffering, but at the same time, he was a psychologist who ended up being doctor there, and is essentially doing the role of Farris here. He just helping people. He was there to treat their physical ailments, but really what he noticed was that he could try to influence their mental, their psychological aspect, and trying to help them find meaning in the suffering. And I think his philosophy is all about that. And I definitely wanted to bring it back to you to ask you, how could people find meaning in their suffering? Not only suffering from biological problems that you deal with, but just in general life. How could they deal with the suffering that they're going through right now?
Yeah, I love that book as well. And it really has changed me a lot. And the talking points have been in that book. One of the things that he talks about, I don't even know if I'm saying it right, but I encourage people to check out the book first of all, but look up this whole concept that he talks about of logotherapy. Or Legat. I'm not sure how
Logotherapy.
Yeah. And it speaks to what I mentioned a little bit earlier, and why I think we all have it in us to sort of overcome things. We just need someone to help us realize it. So to answer your question, I think it's when you're going through something so traumatic, it's easy to play the role of victim. Like, why did this happen to me? How can this happen to me? I did everything right. But I think the number one thing that you have to do right away is to know that you're not alone. I think that's been one of the most powerful things. When people have a stroke, when people lose a loved one, when people break up in a relationship, they think that they're the only ones going through whatever they're going through. And I think once they're able to connect with other people, and know that they are not the only ones going through whatever they're going through, it empowers them and gives them the realization, okay, I can do this. That's why I think when we see stories of people overcoming such traumatic injuries, events, and we hear other people's stories, that's my goal with this book, is to hopefully help. If it helps one person, that's, it was worth all the time in the world to do this.
Yeah.
So I think once we realize that we're not the only ones going through what we're going through, that is the biggest thing that I think will help individuals start to pivot, shift their perspectives, and then try to get through whatever they're going through. It's work. it has to be intentional. But there is a way to do it. And happiness definitely is something the science shows that we can work on those things, but it's not good enough to know that the science shows that. We have to be able to intentionally go out and try to do it. Just like working out. We know eating bad things is bad for us. We know exercising is good for us. We know smoking is bad for us. But if you go smoke, if you eat crappy food, if you're drinking nonstop, so knowing something is half the battle. We have to be able to sort of put the science into practice. And you have to find what works for you. What works for you, what works for me is going to be different in terms of happiness. And being true to who you are, going back to your point a little bit before, Nick, is like being true to who you are and what makes you happy, not what other people want for you or what other people think will make you happy, I think is an important part of that too.
It's so incredible. I mean, the things that you're talking about are so valuable, you know. So the first thing you talked about there was gratitude, and the fact that, Viktor Frankl went through Auschwitz. You know, I could break this bad habit, or I could go through this ailment, and it really gets you thinking. You know, the mind is the most important thing. You know, Wim Hof he's known for his Wim Hof method, and I think he's just so funny because he goes swimming shirtless in the Arctic, you know, like crazy, like sub-zero temperatures, and he just goes swimming, you know, and most people don't even reach that level because they're always saying, you know, I don't understand. I can't go through this. You know, this is impossible, whatever. But if you see these people, you know, if you see all these incredible people who have overcome all these problems with our body, you could really see how valuable the mind is. Another thing you talked about, which I really loved, is that knowing does not mean doing. And I think that's what makes your book so valuable. You know, it's crazy because when actually Dr. Lori Santos of Yale, I highly suggest people take her course, by the way, online course.
Absolutely.
Yeah, free, incredible. I could link it actually right here. Let me get that down. It's gonna have a clip.
And she has have you listened to her podcast? It's really, really good.
It's the Happiness Lab, right?
The Happiness Lab, yeah.
Yeah, I'm linking all that here because it is so valuable. But at the same time, I do think she the first thing that she talks about is known as the Gi Joe Fallacy. And for a little background, Gi Joe was a TV show. The Gi Joe show was a TV show in the 1980s, and at the end of the show, the whole thing was he's a military guy and he's supposed to be a role model. He's supposed to be a hero for kids, and it's all animated. You're watching this movie, this TV show, and every week they have the ending scene, which says, a kid tries to cross the street, and G.I. Joe pulls him back, because, the cars are still going and he didn't look both ways. And then G.I. Joe looks at him and says, make sure you look both ways before you cross the street. And then the little kid always says, now I know, and knowing is half the battle. and
it's so true.
Yeah. Well, actually, so Dr. Lori Santos sort of, picked that apart a little bit because she actually found that the G.I. Joe, knowing is half the battle, is actually somewhat wrong in the fact that knowing is almost like 10% of the battle. Knowing and action are two completely different things. Did you know that 70% of current smokers want to quit but can't? It's incredible. And it's like, why is it? Yeah, exactly. Like, they know exactly what is bad for them. It's not like they're being tricked. It's not like they even, want it. It's that they know, but they just can't do. And I think the happiness perspective, your book, is so incredible because it really shows, these are the things that you can do. Here is the emotional things. It's not like, maybe you should quit smoking. Maybe you should start working out. It's like, no, here's how you could change your mindset. Here's how you could really change what is going on inside of you, your emotions, so that you could actually start doing.
Yeah. And I think it's important to be kind to yourself too, as you try something new, as you try to sort of change your bad habits or whatever, because I feel like sometimes we get into this pattern of okay, I'm going to do something, just like New Year's resolutions. I'm going to get into the gym. That's a prime example. And then a month or two later, people fall off and they're just
January 12th. January 12th is the average.
People give up and they sort of get down on themselves. And I think it's important to be kind to yourself too. And that's something I'm learning. I don't have it all together. It's something that I'm constantly intentional about and trying to figure out and practice. And like I said before, having a moment of weakness is okay, but don't let it turn into a mindset. So having those moments, be kind to yourself and see what works for you. It's not what, like I said before, what works for me, what makes me happy, what drives me is going to be different than what works for you, Nick. So it's going to be, person to person, very subjective, but the science shows that it's possible to change. We just have to figure out ways to do that.
Well, that's the thing that's so interesting, because you deal with all these people who are suffering from these crazy ailments. And I love this idea. Moments of weakness are okay, but don't make it a mindset. And I think that's the thing, when we all suffer, when we go through whatever daily suffering or monthly suffering or long depression spouts, whatever it is, or just a negative mindset in general, we are always thinking thoughts that we don't want to be thinking. 2/3 of our thoughts that we think every day are negative on average. And it's crazy. When you talk about shame is essentially taking those thoughts, right? Saying, I shouldn't be thinking those thoughts, and throwing it into a closet, right? Your mental closet, and then the thing is, you're never changing it, right? Like, you throw it into a closet, but then we know it's just going to come right back up.
It's there, yep.
So you keep throwing it into a closet, but eventually that closet's going to be overfilled, isn't it? And you're going to reach the point where you are just, that closet is overstuffed. You can't close it anymore. And you have suppressed your emotions for so long that it's just that you suffer an outburst, right? That you have some way of that idea really slipping out. And this idea of moments of weakness really says, that you should confront it, right? Instead of pushing those feelings away, really accept those feelings, really, take them in and really understand that they are a part of you and that you shouldn't put them away.
100%. You have to acknowledge those things, because if we just sweep it under the rug, if you just put it in your closet, guess what? Soon enough, when you open that door, all that stuff is going to pile up on you. You're going to feel like you can't breathe. You're going to feel like panic attacks are a real thing. That's stress induced. The way we think, our emotional, the mind part of it, and the connection to the body is real. The science is out there. So the emotional piece, the mental part of it can manifest physically. So that's why mental health has been at the forefront for the past 10, 15, 20 years, and has gained a lot of momentum. So you can't just hide those things. And it's something that I did early in my career, and it's something I'm still working on, just writing things down, journaling. I used to think that was nuts. I used to think like that was absolutely crazy. But it really does help me. It just unclutters all that mental stuff in my mental closet, and it helps me sort of open up space for some of the things that I really want to be focusing on. And it's a powerful tool, and it's something so simple that we can all try to do.
Yeah, well, actually, so it's crazy. I really enjoyed this conversation, this deep conversation. Let's get into a little bit of the concrete, because obviously a lot of this is abstract. What is your morning routine? You talked about it a little bit. You use gratitude in the morning. What is your morning routine, and how do you use it to really set up your day?
Yeah. So the first thing I typically do, I love running. Something that just going back to what makes me happy. It's the one time of the day where I feel like I'm not doing 500 things. I'm not multitasking. So I typically will run in the morning, but before I even do that, I usually wake up. I have a book. It's like a 15-minute prayer / mindfulness book that I do. There's 365 different ones, one for every day of the year. So 15 to 20 minutes every single morning. I will just wake up. First thing I do is make my bed, which sounds silly, but just get in the habit of doing that. Something I always do. I will come downstairs into my little kitchen here. I will read and meditate for 10 to 15 minutes. It's not really meditation. It's really just reading. And if you're religious, that's great. I just do a little bit of a prayer too. Nothing crazy, just waking up and being grateful and thankful for everything that I have. And again, when I try every morning before I leave, that's something else I do, is write one thing I'm grateful for. So that's the first 10, 15 minutes. I always avoid picking up my phone. That's the first thing. I feel like it took me some time and practice, but I used to be in the habit of waking up, checking my phone, looking at social media. I avoid that for the first 15 to 20 minutes. So I'll do that. And then I'll have my espresso, which is very important to me, have a little bit of a coffee, and then I will shower. I'll go for my run, shower, and then usually 45 minutes to an hour is what I typically allot to my morning before I even get out the door to go to work. And then once I leave to go to work, I see what I wrote on the chalkboard in the morning. I'll erase it. Again, that just gets my mind thinking about things I'm grateful for. When I come home, I write one thing I'm grateful for again at the end of the day. So it's a good way, just a reminder, as soon as I leave and when I come home, I'm able to sort of look at that chalkboard and just put my minds, whether I hit traffic on the way home or something so small that threw me off, it just recalibrates my mindset for the rest of the day when I get home too. So that's pretty much my morning routine and what I try to do on a daily basis.
So what effect does, first of all, you do a lot of mindfulness training,
Yeah.
but what effect does, I had Eric Legrand on my podcast and he spoke a lot about that. He said God is just so powerful. Like it has such an influence. And I think, we live in such you're a doctor who likes God. It's like, how crazy is that idea? But at the same time, it's like, I think, I think we all understand that science and objectivity is not going to be the way that brings fulfillment, right? Like it's not going to get us there completely. So I must ask, as a doctor, as a physical therapist, what is it that that attracts you to God, and at the same time, how much does it help you?
Yeah. And I never impose, obviously my religion or even like when you think about stoicism too, like it's something greater than yourself. And I think
Mm-hmm.
whether it's God, whether it's some sort of other religion or, I just feel like it helps me stay grounded in my day to day and being able to recognize and just be mindful of knowing it's not about me. And it, for me, it's God that really I lean into a lot and try to build my relationship with him. And it doesn't have to be him, but just being mindful and being appreciative and knowing that I'm part of something bigger
Yeah.
than Farris. It's not about me. And I think when you do that, it helps you realize how big the world is as well. And like, we're all human and it's so much more than just any one person. The more we're able to help other people, the more I try to help other people, the more I'm able to build those connections with other people. It just gives me a little bit of a perspective to know that it's much bigger than myself. That's the
Yeah.
biggest thing. And it just that, and it keeps me grounded to know that, it's really just so much bigger than myself. And if the only thing I can do is try to bring a little bit of kindness to humanity. Kindness is free, and it's something that I really try to do on a daily basis. So
It's so interesting. It seems like most of the people that I have on my podcast so far, I've had you're my 21st episode.
mm-hmm.
So it's crazy that most of our life goals, I must say, are so similar. We look at it from so many different perspectives, but what your life goal really is, and I don't know if I'm framing this from a psychological perspective. Your life goal, as well as mine, is that I desire to make people conscious, right? To make people realize, what is it that's best for me? And at the same time, what is it that everyone wants from me? And how can I actually focus on myself? And you do that with your physical therapy patients, people who have suffered immensely. And at the same time, you try to do it with yourself. And I find that it's really powerful to see that you are doing the same thing as me, just in a completely different method of getting there.
And that's the beauty of it, right? Like, it doesn't have to be one cookie cutter recipe. Everyone has their own journey. Everyone has their own style of doing things. Everyone has their own way of different paths that they're going to take. But I think that's a valuable lesson in itself, to know that just because I'm doing it one way doesn't mean you have to do it that way, and vice versa. When you look on social media, you see someone's posts and how they're living their life. Doesn't mean that's how you have to live your life. There's more than one path to get to the final destination. When you think about
Yeah.
final destination, it varies from person to person too. What drives me is not going to be the same for you, Nick. So that's why the psychological piece, and I think reflection is something I talk about in my book too. I haven't really appreciated my psychology degree as much in the past 2 or 3 years, 4 years, as I did, versus when I first started my career. And if we just look back and reflect on all the experiences that we have been through to this very day, I truly believe that they set us up for what we have already gone through, where we're at, and then sort of prepare us for the next steps too. Reflection is huge and something I practice a lot, and something that can be very powerful because it helps us look at the things that we have gone through, learn from those things, and be appreciative for everything we have and where we are currently at in the moment. Again, speaking to staying in the process of what we're trying to do in our lives.
Yeah, exactly. Speaking about morning routines, actually, speaking of the process, every morning I read in my journal, and I purposefully called my journal. I don't call it journal. I call it the lab.
Nice.
I call it the lab, and the whole thing is, I am in my personal laboratory working on myself, and the whole purpose of a lab is to keep testing, keep making changes, keep trying to figure out, maybe this product didn't work, maybe this iteration of whatever product didn't work, but eventually we got to keep testing, see what works, and then we're eventually going to get there. And I think, how is it possible to improve on yourself if you're not reflecting? Like, right? Like, you want to hear a funny thing? Actually, I got Colin Robertson on my podcast, and he talked about this in his book, The Will of Heroes, podcast number 18. He said that there was a study where they asked people to go and work out, right? And they asked these students, hey, go and work out. Write down how many hours you think you're going to work out this week. And I don't have the exact numbers, but let's say they said 6 hours, right? They said, okay, this week I'm going to work out for no, it was the month. It was the month. So for the month, they said they were going to work out. I think it was, we'll say 20 hours. How about that?
Okay.
And then some of them hit it, but very, very few of them hit it. I think these were people that didn't work out often, right?
Right.
So then they brought them in the next month, and these people found out, okay, I got 6 hours. I think it was 6 hours was the average. And they said, write your goals for the next month. This was what the researchers said. The goals on average, when they were 20 the first time, the students averaged saying 20 hours. They bumped it up to 25. Why?
Oh my goodness.
What flaw in our human psychology is telling you worked out six hours this month and you wanted to hit 20? Instead of maybe lowering your goals to hit 15 or maybe 10, we decide to go to 25. But I noticed that I did this my entire life. I set goals for my days, I set goals for my weeks, my months, and whenever I didn't hit it, I said, tomorrow. I didn't do it today, but tomorrow is going to be the day where everything changes. And it's such a flawed mentality, but at the same time, we don't sit here and reflect in that way.
Yeah, and I think that's why it has to be small changes. It's not, when people think change, they think immediately like it has to be this huge shift and change in their lifestyle. For me, running is huge, and like running a marathon is a perfect example. It's a marathon, not a sprint. So you can't just go out and run a marathon. You have to be able to run, half a mile, a quarter of a mile, and then build off of that. So it doesn't have to be a crazy change. Even if you write one sentence a day, you don't have to journal. And I feel like when people hear the word journaling, they have to write like a page or 2 pages or 3 pages. Even like a simple thank you note, telling someone. There's studies that show like when you write a thank you note, the impact that it has on your brain, it sort of elicits, and the pathways that light up on functional MRIs elicits and activates parts of the brain that help release certain neurotransmitters. that have lasting impacts, not just for that day or that week that you wrote the thank you note, like little tiny things, and you build on it. It's not a one-time thing that you do. And I think we're always in search of like the quick fix. Like I love when I see like things on social media or like the news, like 5 things, to get happier, like 10 minutes to get happier. Yes, I think that's true, but it's not just those 10 minutes. It has to be 10 minutes every single day, and then 12 minutes, and then 15 minutes. So it's a process. It's a process.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, that's exactly what you're talking about. Rule 4 of the happiness perspective is focus on the process versus the product. And I noticed this in my own life. Obviously I'm coming out with the book this year, and it's about breaking bad habits. And I noticed that my entire life I was so good at breaking bad habits, but I was never good at building new ones. And I think we all struggle with that. Got to get to the gym, got to do all these things, got to blah, 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 and I found that my whole life, whenever I said I was going to go to the gym, I would go to the gym, I would get motivated, 1 month, 2 months, I would push through it, and then I would die. But the problem was that I would wake up, I want to get up at 5:32, so I was a little bit crazy, but I think this is applicable to everybody. Go 5 minutes, drive to the gym, 1 hour, work out at the gym, 5 minutes, drive back, then shower, then get ready. It's really a 1.5 hour, 2 hour process, even if you're doing it later in the day. And that's the thing. We're trying to balance. We're trying to have an intense workout. We have this idea of what an intense workout is, but really our problem is not the intensity. Our problem is the consistency.
Agreed.
Right? So every day I decided, I learned it from this podcast. One of the people came on and said, no, consistency is the problem. And it really woke me up. So I woke up every day now. I just do a 4-minute workout, 4-minute workout. I do a set of push-ups, 1 set of push-ups. I do as many push-ups as I possibly can. I hang from my pull-up bar. I don't even do pull-ups. I just hang from the pull-up bar because it's supposed to be very good for your posture. And
it is good. It is. Speaking
right.
from PT, that's very good. Yeah, stretch for your posture.
Oh, I'm happy. I'm happy that pleased the physical therapist. Yes. But then, I do it for 4 minutes a day, and that's the thing. I made it a habit. So now I've done it for the last 100 days, and after my 60th day, I added on another one. So I added on after I did the hangs and the push-ups. Now I do 1 extra workout, whichever one I decide to choose.
Awesome.
And hopefully, the process goes in. And over the years, that could end up building up to getting the consistency as well as the intensity. But the problem really is the consistency and not the intensity.
Agreed. It compounds. You think about financially, like why do people invest in 401ks? It's not to be able to have retirement when they're 30. That would be nice. Don't get me wrong. Yeah. But you're putting small things, small contributions into your retirement. So then 30, 40, 50 years later, you can now capitalize on those because you were consistent, you were diligent over the past 30 years, 40 years to enjoy those things later in life. So yeah, again, I keep harping on it, but it has to be a consistent, intentional effort on a daily basis. You can't get to, and unfortunately with happiness, there's no, at work now we scan everyone's temperature. You can't scan someone's forehead and say, okay, you're a 10 out of 10 on happiness. There's no thermometer for happiness. It's very subjective. And my goal in my personal life and something I try to do is try to get to as close as 10 as possible. It goes up and down. When I travel, it might jump to a 9 or 10. When I come back, I'm working for like 3 months, 4 months. It might dip down to like a 6 or 7. But I am trying, my goal is to try to get as consistently as close to 10 as possible. It just helps me on my daily mindset on a daily basis. And again, it's going to be up and down. It's not going to be, I'm not going to get a promotion. I'm not going to win the lottery, win $20 million. And then, okay, I'm a 10 out of 10 for the rest of my life. Yeah. In fact, there's studies that show when people do win the lottery, their happiness goes down months, even years later. So it's hard. It's not easy, but it's a process and something that we consistently have to work on.
So Tony Robbins has a great quote, and this is his goal for us. He says that we should live in, quote, a beautiful state. The goal of our daily lives is to live in a state where we are just mentally, imagine we are, like exactly what you're saying. We're constantly at an 8, we're constantly at a 9. And then we have those moments, right? Those memorable moments, those amazing moments that put you up to an 11, put you up to a 12, but
Yep.
most of the time we're sitting at that constant, beautiful state. So let me ask you, and this is probably the final question, what is it that we can do to put us in that beautiful state?
I think it goes back to something I alluded to earlier. Being true to who you are and what makes you happy. And my definition of happiness has varied as I've gone through this. And I tried to make it as simple as possible. And my current definition of happiness, and it's changed over the past year, is just to follow your smile. So if that means to travel for me, to run for me, those are things that make me happy. So following your smile, you have to be true to who you are, first of all, and follow things that make you happy. If you like to draw, if you like to be artistic, then do those things more consistently. With the one caveat, I would say the power of human connection and, trying to build relationships is something that I try to do and take pride in. My ability to connect with my patients, my ability to connect with people. And I go into a story in my book about, there was a friend of mine who teaches Italian, and one of his friends who I sort of befriended, he had just moved here from Italy. And we were talking, and I asked him, like, what do you miss most about being in Italy versus being here? And I thought he was going to say the food or the wine or something. He said the moment of the coffee. In Italy, you go to a cafe 4 or 5 times a day, you have an espresso. That moment of the coffee where and oftentimes you're doing it with a friend, that moment where you're connecting with someone for those 4, 5, 6, 7 minutes, saying hello, connecting with them, seeing how they're doing. I think the connection with other people is something that is the foundation for happiness individually, but more collectively as a society and humanity. I think we need to connect more with other people, and it's something that I pride myself deeply in. And I think it's rooted in the way I was brought up with my family and my parents, and the way my dad treated his customers in his profession. So I think human connection, following your smile, and being true to who you are the most important things to try to stay consistently happy and flex your happiness muscle with a little bit more strength and more consistently.
Wow. So you can learn a lot more about his philosophy and amazing philosophy in his book, The Happiness Perspective, which is coming out, first of all, when?
December 7th is the official publication date, tentative, I should say, but that week of December 7th. And then if you want to just connect with me on Instagram, and then I also today I'm actually updating my website. I do have a website. If you just go to www.thehappinessperspective.com, all my information will be on there, and it's something I'm working on as well. So, but my Instagram is Farris, just my first name, 2986 is the handle. So those are probably the best ways to connect with me.
And then to close it out, for the people who have watched this whole podcast, for Farris Fakhoury, give people a reason. Explain to them why they should buy your book and dig deeper into the happiness perspective.
Yeah, I think the number one reason and my goal with the book is to make people realize that happiness is in our control more than we think. It's not about the hand that life deals us. I see it every single day. The happiest people are the ones who are able to sort of dig in and dive into, what makes them happy, being true to who they are, no matter how big or small the obstacles we face, to eventually being able to flex their happiness muscle more consistently and live a more fulfilling and purposeful life. So check it out. I would love for you guys to, if you have any questions or anything, I'll be more than happy to answer. But yeah, that's sort of the overall goal of my book, and I hope it helps people in their journeys in life.
All right, awesome. And the day that he publishes, that will be in the link of this video. But until then, hit him up on either his Instagram, which will also be down below, and also his website. Farris Fakhoury, thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Nick. I appreciate you having me on, and stay safe.